At some point in life, many people begin to notice something strange and difficult to explain. A quiet sensation that being who they truly are is not just uncomfortable, but dangerous. Not dangerous in an obvious physical way, but on a deeper, more diffuse level. As if existing without filters could cost something essential: acceptance, belonging, love, or safety. And so, without a conscious decision, a constant impulse emerges to adjust, restrain, and shape oneself. Not because there is a desire to deceive, but because at some point authenticity began to feel too risky. This fear doesn't appear out of nowhere. It isn't a character flaw or a lack of courage. It is learned, slowly constructed through experiences where being spontaneous led to unwanted consequences. A comment that resulted in rejection, an emotion that was mocked, a desire that was dismissed, a boundary that was ignored. The body records these moments with precision. Long before the mind forms explanations, the nervous system learns an implicit rule: it is not safe to show up fully. From there, something shifts. Life stops being lived as expression and starts being lived as management. Management of image, tone, words, reactions. You learn to observe yourself from the outside while you act. You learn to anticipate what others expect. You learn to avoid certain topics, emotions, and postures. Not because someone is constantly threatening you, but because the risk has already been internalized. The danger is now internal. It lives in the memory of what happens when you are too much, or not enough, or simply different. Psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott referred to this as early adaptation. When the environment is not sufficiently safe to receive spontaneity, the individual learns to shape themselves around what is expected. This is how the false self emerges. A way of existing that ensures relational survival, but at the cost of authenticity. The false self works. It pleases. It adapts. It maintains relationships. But it does not feel deeply. It does not create freely. It does not live with vitality. It functions. Over time, this functioning becomes so automatic that a person begins to believe this is who they are. That's just how I am. I'm not very emotional. I prefer to keep to myself. I don't really need anyone. These statements sound like personality traits, but often they are defenses, refined strategies to avoid emotional exposure, because at some level the body still believes that being seen is dangerous. Carl Jung described this phenomenon as excessive identification with the persona. The persona is the social mask necessary to function in society. Everyone has one. The problem arises when the persona becomes the only possible identity, when everything alive, contradictory, sensitive, or unpredictable is pushed into the shadow. The shadow does not disappear. It simply becomes unconscious. And what cannot be lived consciously begins to express itself as anxiety, emptiness, irritability, or a persistent sense of unreality. This is why so many people say, "I don't know who I am." Not because they lack an identity, but because they never felt safe enough to explore it. Identity does not develop in isolation. It forms in relationship. If early relationships taught that full expression leads to pain, identity contracts. It becomes minimal, functional, socially acceptable, but impoverished. The danger of being yourself is not located in the present. It comes from the past. But the body does not experience time the way the rational mind does. What was dangerous once continues to be treated as a threat. Bessel van der Kolk explains that trauma is not just what happened, but what happens in the body when something reminds it of what happened. If at some point expressing emotions led to rejection or humiliation, the body learns to shut those emotions down, not as a choice, but as protection. This protection comes at a high cost. When parts deemed dangerous are turned off, vital parts are turned off as well. Enthusiasm, desire, curiosity, spontaneous joy. Life begins to be lived in safe mode, without major risks, but also without depth. Everything is controlled, calculated, moderated. The person becomes functional, but not necessarily alive. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard described this state as a quiet form of despair, not loud or dramatic, but hidden behind normalcy. A life where nothing is technically wrong, yet something essential is missing. The despair of not being oneself. of living in constant departure from one's own truth. Being yourself feels dangerous because at some point it was. Perhaps not in obvious ways, perhaps not through overt trauma. Sometimes all it takes is an emotionally inconsistent environment, unpredictable caregivers, conditional affection, attention that appeared and disappeared. In such conditions, the child learns that adaptation is necessary to preserve connection. They learn to feel less, to ask for less, take up less space, and this lesson solidifies. In adulthood, the context changes, but the nervous system doesn't always notice. New relationships, new environments, potentially safer people, and still, the body reacts as if danger is imminent. Vulnerability creates tension. Authenticity produces anxiety. Honesty triggers fear. Not because something bad is happening now, but because something bad happened before, and it was never integrated. Modern society reinforces this pattern. We live in a culture that values control, performance, and image. Deep emotions are often seen as weakness, sensitivity as instability, authenticity as a lack of professionalism. From an early age, we learn to behave, to regulate ourselves outwardly, even when internally everything is fragmented. The world rewards those who perform well, not those who feel deeply. In this context, being yourself is not only an internal challenge, it is an act of resistance. It means going against a system that prefers predictability over truth. It means risking disapproval, being misunderstood, not fitting in. And for a nervous system trained to associate non-belonging with threat, this feels like real danger. This is why many people remain stuck in relationships, jobs, and identities that no longer make sense. Not because they don't know what they want, but because the emotional cost of claiming it feels too high. The fear is not change itself, it is exposure. The what if. What if I'm rejected? What if I'm alone? What if I discover I'm not enough? These fears are not childish. They are emotional memories, and they are not resolved through motivational phrases or rational decisions. The body needs to relearn that the present is different from the past. That feeling is not a sentence. That being seen does not automatically lead to abandonment. This relearning is slow, gradual. It requires repeated experiences of emotional safety. Small acts of honesty that do not lead to collapse. Small boundaries that do not destroy connection. Small expressions that are not punished. Being yourself does not mean exposing everything to everyone. It is not the absence of filters. It is presence. It is noticing when you are betraying yourself in order to feel safe. And with care, choosing not to do that all the time. It is feeling fear and still allowing a little more truth. Not all at once, but enough for life to begin flowing again. When this reconnection starts, something interesting happens. Anxiety does not disappear immediately. Sometimes it even increases, because the body is leaving a familiar pattern, but alongside the fear, something long forgotten returns. Vitality. A sense of being more whole, more real. Emotions regain texture, relationships gain depth. Even when difficult, they become truthful. Nietzsche once wrote that becoming who you are requires crossing the fear of losing who you have been. The identity built for survival must be questioned, not to be destroyed, but to stop being a prison. What once protected you can later restrict you. Recognizing this is not ingratitude, it is maturity. The danger of being yourself is real when you are still surrounded by the same conditions that demanded the mask. But often, that danger has already passed. What remains is habit, automatic defense, the body acting as if it were still in hostile territory, and the question becomes not, how do I eliminate fear, but what is this fear trying to protect? When you ask that question honestly, something shifts. Fear stops being the enemy and becomes a messenger. It points to old wounds that still need care, to parts of you that were silenced too early, to a life that may never have been fully lived. Being yourself is not an event. It is an ongoing process of return, a delicate calibration between safety and truth, between protection and expression. There is no final version. There is listening. There is choice. There is the possibility of slowly inhabiting your own body with less fear. If being authentic still feels dangerous to you, don't judge yourself. It doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means you learned how to survive. The question now is whether you are willing, little by little, to learn how to live. If this video resonated with you, pause for a moment. Notice what you feel in your body right now. Don't analyze it, just notice. That simple gesture is already a step outside the armor. And if you want to continue this journey, consider subscribing to the channel. Here we don't talk about idealized versions of who you should be. We explore the quiet return to who you were before you learned that being yourself was dangerous. Share this video with someone who may also be living behind a protection that no longer serves them, because being yourself is not the ultimate risk. The real risk is never trying.